City Clerk, let the record show that Councilmember Costa arrived just as we were going into closed session and joined us for the entire closed session. And whenever you're ready, Joe. And our city attorney will give a report on action taken during closed session.
Thank you, Mayor. The City Council has directed staff to obtain statements of interest and qualifications from organizations that provide services for homeless shelters. Those submittals will be due back to the City Council or the city before the next council meeting, so the council has an opportunity to understand the level of interest from the community and those organizations to see what the next step would be. The next step is anticipated to be seeking proposals from those groups who meet some minimum qualifications to submit a proposal to provide homeless shelters within the city of Lompoc, with a focus on being ready to step in if the need to step in arises because of LRCDC disbanding or with regard to the Marks House.
Thank you. Bob Key, come on down. And for our invocation this evening, Bob Key. Would you all rise, please?
Dear God, the Almighty Creator and Giver of life, may you bless this council whom you have entrusted to run the affairs of this city. May you grant unto them complete knowledge of your will, spiritual wisdom and understanding, so they may please and honor you in the morally upright decisions they will make as they learn to trust and grow in the knowledge of your virtue. As you guide us through the counsel of these qualified men and women, may you prosper this city in the midst of national economic turbulence. May you strengthen them with your glorious power, so they may acquire the endurance and patience they will need to accomplish the task ahead. Bless their families, Lord, for the personal sacrifice they make to provide leadership for our great city of Lompoc. I give thanks to you for hearing and attending to the requests of this prayer, O God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
And our first presentation this evening is a Special Olympics presentation by Police Chief Timothy Dabney.
Mayor, City Council, members of the audience, and those of you viewing at home. It's my pleasure to be here once again, and it's that time of year again when we make presentations with regard to Special Olympics, and particularly the Special Olympics car show that occurs every year. Law enforcement first became involved in the Special Olympics in 1981 with the very first torch run, and that torch run took place in Kansas, and there were 8 officers, and they didn't raise any money at all. Last year, over 85,000 officers participated in various Special Olympics events, torch runs, and fundraisers to benefit the Special Olympians and their families. Here on the Central Coast, the Lompoc Police Department has participated in Special Olympics program for over 20 years. We've done plane pools, tip-a-cop events, charity runs, many other functions, but the most successful event by far is the annual Lompoc Police Department car show. In fact, it's been touted as the largest single-day fundraiser for Special Olympics in the state of California. On August 13th, the Lompoc Police Department held its 10th annual car show to benefit Special Olympics. The car show and cruise night have become a signature event for the city, drawing in participants and spectators from across the nation. In fact, one couple from Oklahoma won a surfboard in the raffle. I don't think they used it much, but yeah. But none of this would be possible without the vision and dedication and hard work of Harry Height. For the last 10 years, Harry has engaged in this labor of compassion to benefit Special Olympians and their families in our community. So to start off with, I'd like to recognize Harry and have him join me in making the presentation to our guests. So as Harry comes forward, there's a certificate of appreciation for Harry Height, in appreciation of your outstanding service to the City of Lompoc in coordinating the 10th Annual Lompoc Police Department Car Show to benefit Special Olympics. For the last 10 years, your efforts have created a signature event for our community, enhanced the image of the Lompoc Police Department, and raised over $240,000 to benefit Special Olympians and their families who reside in our community. Thanks, Harry.
Thank you.
Now we have a couple of presentations to make, Harry and I together. This event would not have grown to the magnitude of it that it has over the years without the assistance of many businesses in our community, community-based organizations, volunteers, and churches. I think you know where we're going. Bernie Fetterman is with us tonight, and at my request, so we can publicly thank him and the members of his church for their tremendous effort in assisting the department with various facets of the car show, including concessions, silent auctions, setup, cleanup, and many other things. As a chaplain for the Lompoc Police Department and a pastor in our community, Bernie is always willing to step up and support the betterment of our community. However, once you get that plaque ready, we'll give it to the church. I'm here to tell you that Bernie's a cheater. And the mayor can attest to that fact. Every year we have what's called the Great Race. And if you've been to the car show, you know we set up a Hot Wheels track. For the youngsters, we give out Hot Wheels cars, and to the participants, they can race their cars against each other. And then at the appointed hour, the mayor, myself, a dignitary that's invited to the car show, and Chaplain Bertie Fetterman participate in the Great Race. And as the mayor can attest, this year, my car and the mayor's car were both rigged so they wouldn't even reach the finish line. Mine had square wheels. I don't think his had wheels at all. So once again, Bernie Fetterman is the winner of the Great Race. And so if we can have Chaplain Fetterman come up, and we'd like to give him a plaque to share with the members of his congregation, who we deeply appreciate, and begrudgingly we give you the trophy for the Great Race.
He asked me if I want to say something. Hey, we appreciate doing this, and the community support is great. What a worthy cause, Special Olympics. A lot of guests from out of town come and stay in our hotels, spend their money here, which is a good thing, and we appreciate that. Thank you for letting us partner with you, and we'll keep doing all we can to make Lompoc better. Thank you.
The next people we'd like to recognize are Ramona and Corey Guzman. You want to come on up here, Corey? Where's your mom? Come on, Ramona. The Guzman family has been a fixture at the Lompoc Police Department. Corey is not only a Special Olympian, but he's been an explorer with the department. Corey and his mom work hard with selling with the department. Come on over here, Corey. To make the car show a reality. Corey usually takes the cake for selling tickets, although I think I beat him this year. Soliciting silent auction items for the raffle or for the silent auction, and coordinating with the Special Olympians and their families who are here with us tonight. So we could not do what we do without the two of you, so thank you. So.
Thank you.
All right, good job. And we have with us tonight Jessica Marshalik. Jessica, why don't you come on up? And all the other Special Olympians and their families, come on up. Jessica is the sports coordinator for Northern Santa Barbara County Special Olympics. And we would like to present, on behalf of the police department and the city of Lompoc, to you a check for the proceeds from this year's car show for $20,000.
On behalf of Special Olympics Northern Santa Barbara County, I'm very honored to be here tonight to accept this check. We'd like to thank Harry and the Lompoc Police Department, of course, for putting on another successful event. We'd like to thank the City of Lompoc and especially the Lompoc Recreation Parks and Urban Forestry Department for their continued support of Special Olympics. This money here is pretty much the backbone of the funding that we use for our programs in Lompoc, and we're very grateful for the hard work and effort and time that was put into this event, and not only the money, but also for being out there and representing our Special Olympians in the community. So thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Christy Bell, are you here? There you are. This is a proclamation for Lung Cancer Awareness Month. Whereas lung cancer is the leading cause of cancer death in both men and women in the United States, and whereas lung cancer takes the lives of more Americans each year than breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, liver cancer, and kidney cancer combined, and whereas former smokers and people who have never smoked comprise the majority of the cases of lung cancer each year, whereas 70% of the new lung cancer cases will be diagnosed in late stage with only a 15% 5-year survival rate, and whereas early lung cancer diagnosis and management protocols exist yet have not been embraced as a standard of care, and whereas funding for lung cancer research falls far short of that of other less fatal diseases, and whereas the National Lung Cancer Partnership is a group of leading doctors, researchers, patient advocates, and lung cancer survivors who are working together to improve treatments for lung cancer patients, dedicated to raising public awareness of the disease and generating funding for lung cancer research. Now, therefore, I, John H. Lynn, Mayor of the City of Lompoc, do hereby proclaim November 2011 as Lung Cancer Awareness Month in the City of Lompoc, and urge all of our citizens of the state of California to do all we can to make lung cancer a national public health priority and offer compassion to people with lung cancer. And on a sidebar, I would say that's what my father passed away from. So thank you so very much for your efforts.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. I'm very honored to accept this proclamation tonight on behalf of the National Lung Cancer Partnership. I've been an advocate for many years. My mother was diagnosed with lung cancer 5 years ago, and she is living and doing well. I accept this also on behalf of all of those who are survivors and living with lung cancer. It is a very important cause to myself, my family, and to those that I work with. Mayor Lynn, I would just like to present you also a token of my appreciation. Thank you.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mary Lynn. Really quickly, I just wanted to make sure to announce a wonderful event that we're going to be having on Thursday in conjunction with this proclamation, and that's Shine a Light on Lung Cancer Vigil. That'll be taking place at 6 p.m. at the Elks Lodge, and it is a second annual now. It should be a wonderful event. So again, Shine the Light on Lung Cancer Vigil, 6 p.m. at the Lompoc Elks Lodge. I will be the MC, so you know it's going to be fun. And I'm really looking forward to it, and I would love for as many folks in the community to show up and show some support for these folks. So thank you very much.
I'll be in the front row. And now the city administrator's report.
Mr. Mayor, council, audience, and viewers, staff has a number of items tonight to announce. At the council meeting of October 4th, council requested staff to contact the Lompoc Unified School District Adult Education Division to inquire whether a presentation could be given on the nursing vocational program at a future meeting. Staff contacted Ms. Susan Williams of the Adult Education Division, who confirmed she will be available to give a presentation at on the nursing program at the December 6th City Council meeting. Public Works Director Larry Bean, Steve Patterson of the building contract firm Broadspec, and the building division staff held a public workshop last week, Monday, October 24th. The workshop was well attended, and Broadspec shared information with the community regarding building services currently provided by Broadspec. Topics included information regarding the electronic plan check services, allowing applicants opportunity to track and view submitted plans on the internet. Applicants also have the opportunity to submit plans electronically. Additionally, daily inspection timelines were outlined and information shared regarding permit plan checks and expiration of permits. Attendees commended building staff and Broadspec building inspector Brian Hurley and building official Steve Patterson announced that Broadspec will provide the city a full-time building official mid-November. Mr. Mayor, City Council, and viewers, at the council meeting of October 4th, Ms. Trina Long of the County Public Health Department shared statistics regarding the sale of tobacco products to minors in the city of Lompoc. In response to the shared statistics, the Lompoc Police Chief, Tim Dabney, provided me information regarding the department's aggressive prevention program. Several grants have been obtained that have provided funding for officers to conduct decoy sting operations for both alcoholic beverage control and youth access to tobacco. Letters and media releases have been made over the course of many years, warning store owners of the consequences of selling alcohol and or tobacco to minors. And several times each year, whether grant funded or not, officers of the Community Services section of the police department have conducted decoy sting operations and shoulder tap operations to deter youth access to tobacco and alcohol. Lompoc Police conducted decoy operations on October 7th and 8th of 32 businesses within the city of Lompoc limits that sell tobacco products. And one location sold tobacco to the decoy, and that business clerk was issued a citation. So 32 businesses challenged with one violation. The violation rate is 3.12%. The Lompoc Police Department is striving for 100% compliance with the law, and the department has sent letters to each business selling tobacco within our city, reminding them of their legal requirements, and will continue to follow up with periodic decoy operations on a regular basis to ensure compliance. And other news related to the Lompoc Police Department and was featured in today's Santa Barbara News Press. The department recently promoted 2 longtime police department employees to new ranks. Joseph Stetz, who has been with the department for 17 years, was promoted to the rank of police sergeant, and Corey Cox has been promoted to the rank of agent. Both had to complete written examinations, oral presentations, and internal and external professional evaluation panels in order to be promoted. As quoted in the news press, Chief Dabney noted both Sergeant Stetz and Agent Cox have proven themselves to be outstanding professionals who are committed to serving the residents of Lompoc and in their chosen profession. So congratulations to Sergeant Stetz and Agent Cox. Also noted in the news press is the Crime Prevention Forum scheduled for November 15th from 8 a.m. to noon. It will be held in the Lompoc Council Chambers, being offered to Lompoc business owners wanting to gain insight on crime prevention techniques. Included, the department will advise on facility and building security, locks and alarms, and loss prevention techniques, and many other items as well. I was provided the monthly report from the Lompoc Fire Department for activities in October. The Lompoc Fire Department responded to 292 calls during October, 13 fire-related calls, 172 rescue and medical emergency calls, and 107 other calls. Now, there have been a number of changes in the fire department as well, and with the retirement of Acting Chief States effective October 28th, Battalion Chief Stan Hart will be acting in his stead. So we want to congratulate Acting Chief States on his retirement. However, he has agreed to work on the 960 retirement plan and will be back in that capacity November 14th until the appointment of the new fire chief. And as a result of Fire Chief Robert Kovac's retirement, and that was effective October 31st, and he is to be congratulated on his retirement. Promotions for the 2 vacant fire battalion chief, excuse me, was offered to Battalion Chief Mark Bray and Battalion Chief Mark Clayton, and that will be effective November 5th. So they are to be congratulated on their promotion. And that is all I have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief, would you like to say a couple words on the Crime Prevention Forum since you have a whole audience at home? And also, I have one question. Do we commend the people who don't sell the tobacco in our letters to them?
Yes, we can. Generally, what we do is when we send out an informational letter, we remind the businesses that we do periodic stings and what their responsibilities are, but we don't send a follow-up letter saying, congratulations, you've passed. But generally speaking, that the next letter that they get before we do a sting is kind of a reminder, but we can include that in the next one. The Business Owners Forum is a collaboration between the Lompoc Police Department and the Lompoc Valley Chamber of Commerce, and my buddy Ken Ostini, I don't see him here tonight. We've collaborated on pulling together some resources for merchants in the community that will enable them to operate more securely in their businesses, and we'll even have members from the Secret Service here to talk about recognizing counterfeit bills, identity theft. We'll be addressing things like cash checking, taking checks and cashing checks and getting verified identities on people, and including some of the things the city administrator spoke of about site security, surveillance systems, things like that, and just basically be a sounding board for our merchants here in town so that they could ask questions of, if we respond to a certain type of crime at their business, what they can expect and what we're looking for in terms of preventing and apprehending those people who do commit theft. Any other questions?
And ladies first, Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Chief. I don't want to pose this as a question, but more as a suggestion. I just wanted to be sure that the Public Safety Commission is aware and involved in this forum, if not actively, because it will be in the next few weeks, to at least get them aware and involved in the forum, if at all possible.
I'm sorry.
The Public Safety Commission?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not even sure these things exist anymore, but do they still have cigarette vending machines?
I haven't seen one in quite some time.
Okay, so we don't have any.
No.
Lompoc. Okay, so we don't have to. Okay. Good. Do they have? Are they still?
Maybe I saw one at the hospital.
Okay, phone booths. Okay.
With the phone booths.
He missed it.
My recollection is seeing one in a bar where you had to be 21 to get in, but I don't remember seeing them anywhere else.
That may be, yeah. But no, I've seen none out in the general public.
Thank you, Chief. And do we have staff requests and announcements? No? Nothing? Yes, no? Maybe?
Mr. Mayor and Council, no other items. Thank you.
And now for oral communication. This is your opportunity to talk to us about any subject. If the item that you want to talk about is on the agenda, we would prefer that you wait until the item comes up, but if you can't stay, feel free to talk now. We'd rather hear from you than not hear from you. So who would like to speak first? Going once?
Dulcie Sin, citizen or resident of Lompoc. And I just wanted to come and let the council know that I did go down to the county supervisors meeting this morning as an interested citizen to listen in on what their report was going to be at their public open meeting about LHCDC. And it was a very informative meeting. I was particularly interested in the reaction of the supervisors down there and to hear where they got their information and how they were using that information and why they were surprised about the situation going on. They voted to file the report, and they also voted to, it sounds like what you did in closed session, to look at the Bridge House in particular and to look at finding an organization, a nonprofit that could possibly take that over. And my concern when I stepped up and spoke at public hearing there is that my concern has been throughout this process as somebody who is very interested in LHCDC and how their properties are going to be dissolved or whatever the proper term might be, is that we particularly look at our shelter services and our programs, our shelter programs, and that we make a commitment to keep those programs very local, that we look at a system that serves the Lompoc Valley. I'm very concerned that if we start taking a county view of homelessness and a county view of how we should be taking care of our homeless and our individuals who need transition housing and emergency shelter at that time, that Lompoc will be treated as we have many times in the past, where services will be available to the south and to the north, and they won't be available here. Or if south or north have control of our shelter services, and we will see Lompoc becoming the overflow and fallback plan when the shelters in Santa Barbara and the shelters in Santa Maria are full. And I'm very concerned about that. I want to make sure that we are taking care of our community and our citizens here. And I hope that as you look at the RFP, that you're looking, with an eye that says, is this speaking to what we have going on here locally? Is it tying in closely to our citizens who are very generous and have kept our shelter services going for the last couple years as, LHCDC has gone broke and is now going into dissolution, or they're not going bankruptcy, they're dissolving, where they're going with all of that, that our citizens here have been very involved in very many ways. So I gave Chris Moody a call out at the Bridge House. She's our shelter services supervisor for the Bridge House as well as for the Marks House, and she says that it's been very damaging, the information, of course, that hasn't been refuted in the newspaper, acting as because people are getting the idea that the shelters are going to close. They're not going to close. There are too many people in this community who care deeply about these programs. These programs will stay open in one way or another, and we need to continue to let people know as the weather gets colder that the Bridge House is available, and that as needed, that there are rooms available at the Marks House for women and children who need that as well. So I'm hoping that as you look at the proposals, that you look very carefully and that you weight it towards local organizations that will be able to fulfill the promise of what our services, shelter services, are all about. And I also hope, and I do believe that LHCDC would be open to this if we only asked, is that we make sure that the garden projects, which are near and dear to my heart, that the garden projects stay with the shelter services as well. There's so much potential there to have that interconnectedness to hard work and gardening and growing your own food and having a bit of self-sufficiency, building some type of employment record history. So I'm hoping that as we're looking at the Bridge House and the Marks House, we also look at College Avenue Community Garden and the property on North Q Street, which is also gifted and could be used as a community garden as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Carol Benham, Lompoc resident. Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. I want to thank you first for opening up the process on determining who will provide shelter services in the future. I'm very pleased to hear the announcement from the closed session. Thank you. I didn't go to Santa Barbara, but I watched it on my cable TV. I would encourage all of you, if you have time, and anyone listening to this in the public or in the audience, to take it's about 25 minutes, 25 minutes, to watch what occurred at the Board of Supervisors today on the item regarding LHCDC. Some interesting information did come up in handouts, and they had even more information revealed on the screen. The county did talk about their potential liability to HUD, which was $1.4 million. The county did identify all of the properties that it had and announced the total investment in the LHCDC properties, stated the county's position on each loan, second, third, fourth, and in a couple of cases, first. The county also revealed or produced a chronology of events that had happened since January. It did have some interesting information there. The one I'd like to point out to you is we heard from the county staff today that because Pacific Western Bank receivership will take up to a year from now, that there may be an issue with LHCDC dissolving. A special process will have to be pursued with the California Attorney General in order for the organization to actually dissolve, while the receivership process is still going on in court. So I, again, encourage you to take the 25 minutes to listen to that hearing today. I also wanted to point out that the county held a public discussion and then reserved some discussions for the closed session. I would like to, again, encourage this council to consider doing the same. It does not have to be an all or nothing situation. It doesn't have to be everything must be revealed or nothing can be revealed. The county handled that in both open session and closed session today. One supervisor made framed a question that I thought was very good. The supervisor said, who provides the leadership to bring everyone together to protect the public's interest? It is my sincere hope that this council can help provide that leadership to bring everyone together to protect the public's interest. There's still time to do that. If you guys can open up a little bit. And I want to, again, thank you for opening up the process to determine who can provide homeless services in the future. I am not speaking as a member of the Human Services Commission, but the Human Services Commission public minutes available on the web do show in the minutes that the Human Services Commission has expressed an interest in being of assistance to the council. Thank you.
And thank you. And with regard to that, all of us have received the letter from the Human Services Commission signed by all of the members. So thank you very much. Next. Joe.
Well, my name is Dale Willis. I'm the board president of Lompoc Valley Community Youth Center, who does business as Young Adult Outreach, DBA Young Adult Outreach. I also went to Santa Barbara and sat in on the hearing there, and am in agreement and would like to voice our support in keeping things local with regard to Mark's home. We work closely with Victory Outreach, and as you know, we took over the second time around thrift store from Domestic Violence Solutions of Santa Barbara County. The proceeds from the thrift store had been used for supporting domestic violence programs, and our intention had been to find and continue to support domestic violence programs with the proceeds from the second time around. When this information came to our attention that the shelters were going to be, that something needed to be done with the shelters, then we decided, our board decided that perhaps the proceeds from second time around may be used, and that we ought to at least voice our intention to toss our hat in the ring as a potential nonprofit that would be interested in helping and pursuing with the Marks House. So I'm here to just advise you and put our hat in the ring. We did submit a packet to you, and we look forward to anything that we can do to help. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing no one rise, 1, 2, 3, we'll close public comment and come back to the council for the consent calendar. On the consent calendar, we have approval of the minutes of the October 18th meeting,
We have approval of expenditures for payroll and $1,043,000, 2 expense vouchers totaling $990,000. Item number 3, a new water conservation program. Item number 4, the annual SB 1693 compliance report for AB 1600 development impact fees, and this is an impact fee that's paid by new development in the city of Lompoc, and it was established by AB 1600. Authorize the Public Works Director to apply for the city and the city administrator to execute agreements for their Cal Recycle grant program funds. Item number 6, approve an award of contract to purchase 1 mini digger derrick and trailer. And item 7, a text amendment TA 11-02, summary of action amending the city's zoning ordinance, and this is the second reading. Are there any items that a council member would like to have removed from the consent calendar at this time? Councilmember Starbuck.
I don't want to pull an item, but I wanted to ask a couple of questions about it. Mr. Wilkie, consent calendar item 4, our compliance report for AB 1600. I don't know if you have all the answers. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to call you earlier today, but when are we required to update our impact fees?
I don't believe we're actually required to update them ever, but it's up to the governing body to give direction when you see a need to make changes or to look at them. I say that based on the methodology that's being used to update the annual fees, and that's based on a construction cost index. So unless the structure of the fees would change, the amount would be growing over time, taking into account an index factor.
I guess what my question is leading, I'll look at attachment 4 here. We all received an email, and this has to do with fire protection facilities. Residential single family, the impact fee is $193. When you flip it over to park impact fees, it's $3,804. And at this point, I think with all the extra park that we have, we should maybe swap this impact fee to fire. But I think maybe we should, as a council, try and do a review of this, because I think that things have changed since this was initiated in '89 and completed in 2003. Is this something that we would have to go ahead and just do a council request on, or is this something that would be done by your department alone?
It would go ahead.
Go ahead.
It would likely be a substantial and comprehensive report that we'd have to do to comply with AB 1600. AB 1600 is significantly, you need to have significant backup to support your assumptions. So you couldn't just change the character of one impact fee and say now it's for fire when it used to be for parks. You have to have some supporting nexus that goes along with that. And one reason why the fire and police is so low is it's very specific to what we can do, which is additions to the departments. And I'll use police as an example. When we get big enough, we can't necessarily charge for the next police station because that's already serving the area. But you could charge for an incremental police car, for instance. But over the group that would be paying for this, the dollar amount is fairly small. And that's why the impact fees are fairly small for police and fire, because they're not there to buy the next station.
It's probably against the law then to have impact fees for an area that's already served by, say, the police in this district. If we build up someplace else, the impact fee is going to be the same for them then, even though they're going to require the new police coverage. I mean, that's true? Or there's not any way you could have two separate impact fees?
Well, it would also be dependent on how you do the development itself, because the you could have the development build a whole new fire station for you, for instance, without even having an impact fee. But your question about whether we can charge two separate fees, that would have to go back to the impact fees, and it had to go back to the nexus of what those fees are being used for. And for AB 1600, it's for new development. So if you're trying to find some funding for existing development, it wouldn't be a mechanism. AB 1600 would not be a mechanism to be able to do that.
Once upon a time, I spent a great deal of time reading this, so maybe I can add a little bit that'll help. So, for instance, the example that was on the website was the city of Cathedral City, and they had expanded to the, let's see, would be the north for them, and the location of their fire stations was now such that they had to relocate a fire station because of responses. They had to get their two stations further apart. So the difference in the value of relocating the fire station compared to the revenue they received from selling the first fire station. So if the new one was $800,000 and they sold the old one for $300,000, then within the AB 1600 they could divide that $500,000 among the houses that were going to be built in a given area. And the other example, I think, with them was a police station expansion, because as they added homes, they had to add officers, and their police station didn't have additional space. So part of their planning process was to spread the cost of that station enlargement over the number of houses that were going to be built. But what we have here today is basically just an annual report. And if we'd like to talk about this at a little greater length, I think probably our workshop on the 8th would probably be a good opportunity for that. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. Mr. Wilkie, would you be able to provide some information at I do have quite a few questions, but I wouldn't like to do it today because I know that this is just the report that needs to be filed. So is there any way you can return with information during, or is that, excuse me, during the workshop, or do you feel that that's too short a period of time?
I'm sure there can be some basic information provided at the workshop. The reason that this report is being presented by me is the money that comes in from existing impact fees obviously goes through my department, but the development of the actual fees themselves and the criteria for those fees and the nexus for why those fees are considered for new development would likely go back to the whole entire city. For fire and police, we'd have to have input there. We'd have to have input on parks and recreation for those fees. We'd have to have input on all the activities. And it's not just numbers that we would update. We'd have to find where those impacts are being caused by new development and then assign a value to those new. And that it's a much more involved process than just saying that we have a fee for this. And because AB 1600 has a significant amount of requirements to justify those fees.
Thank you. I think my concern is that our first resolution was in 1989, but since then there hasn't been a comprehensive review or update to our fee structure. Is that correct?
We've had several impact fees studies, and the most recent is, like the mayor saying, is 2003, but some of the fees, the original impact fee studies go back before 1990s. I think the first one was in the early 1980s. So we've had and that's just the way it works, because as things change and development changes and build-out happens, the amount that you need for certain activities, the example for parks, changes over time.
Thank you.
Is there any other? I'm sorry. Are there any other questions from the council with regard to the consent calendar? Go ahead, Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mary Lynn. In regards to consent calendar item number 6, I just wanted to provide some information that I had requested and that folks had spoken to me about. So because when we see something come across us for $139,000, I just wanted to look into that very quickly. We have been leasing a mini digger derrick for 2 years now. Purchasing this item will actually be a cost savings to the city, and most importantly, we have to purchase this item to fulfill a state mandate. It's not for out of convenience. So this was included in the 2011-2013 budget, and this is just a follow through on that. And so I just clarified that. I thought the public might want that information as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any, Councilmember Martner?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a couple of comments regarding the minutes, but I guess I need a little bit of clarification. Did we agree that in the workshop next Tuesday, we will address the policy of how minutes need to be written? Is that correct? Is that going to be in the agenda for the workshop?
It's one of the items for your discussion and direction.
Okay, so I'm going to defer my concerns regarding these minutes to next Tuesday.
Is there anyone else? Seeing no lights, I would accept a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to accept the consent calendar. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, could we vote, please? And that passes 5-0. City Administrator, would you be able to give us just kind of a thumbnail perspective on the process for updating AB 1600 at the workshop?
That's actually one of the council request items that had been
that's right, huh?
earlier requested. So when we get to that item,
there you go. Thank you very much. Okay, and our next item will be unfinished business, ordinance number 1579, sub 11, amend the Lompoc Municipal Code, subsections 4.04.090 A and E, relating to the membership of the Airport Commission. And our city attorney, Joseph Pannoni.
Mr. Mayor, I will do that, but did you want to do the council redevelopment agency requests and announcements before that item?
We've had that at the end before now. We agreed to put that at the end of the agenda. So I read over it.
Well, historically it's been here, right? So
I'm good with it. Who would like to make a council redevelopment agency request or announcement? It is at the end. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's been at the end for a while because we agreed we were going to have it down there. It's both.
It was just going to be after the public hearings. And there were no public hearings tonight, so that's why it's showing up where it is.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it only refers to public hearings, or can I make a request?
You can't.
Okay.
This item is in the correct place.
Okay.
It just looks odd because
Okay.
usually there are public hearings before it.
Okay. I
Okay.
stand corrected. Councilmember Martner, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to make two requests that I have made before but have been ignored. The first request is to ask the city to look into the lead paint compliance at the Marks House. I made that question a while ago. I still have not received an answer from the staff. The second one, has the city given monies to properties that LACDC owns, knowing that the properties were not in compliance with federal regulations? I also have asked that question and I have not gotten an answer. I want to further ask the city administrator, do I need 3 votes for this so you can answer these questions, or?
Councilmember Martner and Mr. Mayor, Council earlier has a policy that it takes 3, a majority of council, to request that staff agendize an item. If it's a memo, you agreed that staff would bring that to you in either distribution by hard copy or electronically attached to the weekly city administrator's report.
I'm making a request of a memo, so you do not need 3 votes. So I would like you to get back to me with a memo in the form of an email to all council members regarding these 2 questions that have been asked in the past. The second one is an agenda item request, so I will be looking.
Could you restate those, because I didn't write fast enough.
The first question that I asked, and it probably was about 5-6 months ago when Ms. Lockhart gave an update regarding the funding, CDBG funding, and one of the requirements is that there is a study done on lead paints in the Marks House, and my question was, has the city looked into it?
The lead paint issue, okay.
And I have not received an answer to that yet. The second question, which I asked it, I believe in the October 4th meeting, was, has the city given monies to properties that LHCDC owns, knowing that the properties were not compliant with federal regulations?
With federal regulations, not
Federal
city
regulations.
compliance, is that the question?
Federal regulations.
Okay.
I particularly am interested to know about the low-income covenants and the maintenance requirements.
And just for clarification, that is a memo that you're requesting?
Yes, I'm requesting a memo in the form of an email would be fine, which will go in the public record. The second request that I have is actually an agenda item for a closed session, and the request is the present council has not reviewed our 2 direct employees, which is our city administrator and our legal counsel. I would like to put it in an agenda, and it has to be in a closed session because it is a personnel issue that this council gives a performance review, as it is, I believe, required, that every year our direct employees get a performance review, and I would like that to be scheduled in the near future in a closed session. And I would hope that it can be done by the end of the year, since this council has been seated just about for a year now. Thank you.
I'll second that.
Just a sec. Yeah, it's in our council handbook. We do it in January.
That would be great if we can put it in a closed session,
In January.
agenda item on the first meeting of January.
Yeah. And from my personal standpoint, I kind of hope to talk about that at the workshop to kind of get going in that direction.
I'm requesting an agenda item in the closed session in the first week of January, and I need a third.
You got it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
But you're okay with talking about it at the workshop to kind of get us going in one direction? Okay, good. Thank you. Did you have those things in writing you were asking for?
Not necessarily.
Well, okay, I think I got it.
Marilyn, if I may.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor. The second request, Cecilia, Councilmember Martiner, that you had requested was about whether the city had given money to properties LHCC owns, even if they were out of compliance with federal regulations, and getting more information. I was under the impression, this may be a false impression, that we would get some of that information when we discussed the policy question that we had put forth as an agenda item as well. So that may come as a memo, but I would like that included in the staff report as well for part of what we're analyzing when we're looking at where the policy, or what went wrong and how we can establish the policy.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Thank you for bringing it up.
Okay. Sorry, folks, I can't write fast enough. Okay, is there anyone else that has a, well, yes, I do in that case, if we're doing it here. Coming to us in the near future, we have the general plan update. And this is a very large document containing multiple issues, numerous considerations for potential annexations. And one of the things that I've been uncomfortable with in the past was that things came in big bites. And I'll give an example. There's property on this side of the river
that's parkland that's in the county that we're paying county taxes on. And we haven't addressed that issue because every time it's come along, or in the past when it's come along, it was tied to shall we annex the riverbed and shall we annex River Park. And those are completely different issues. And this time around, I would like to have those issues separated so that the ones that are the proverbial no-brainer we can get done with, and the ones that don't make any sense we can vote down and do it in smaller bites. And so what I'm proposing is that one other council member and I be directed as an ad hoc committee to divide the questions, or if you want me to just me to do it, that's fine too, however the council would like to approach it. But I would really like to divide the questions so that we can put some of these issues away positively, some negatively, and be done with them forever. Councilmember Martiner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Divide the questions as to how they're going to be agendized for decision-making at a council meeting?
Yes.
What about if the staff were to do that? I mean, why do you need a council member and the mayor to do that? I mean, is it that black and white, what's easy and what's not? Or
I don't think so. I think a lot of them are political questions. Matter of fact, if you would volunteer to work with me on it, I think we could get both sides of the picture. We were pretty successful with another issue.
But that means that you're already putting two people in different sides of the arena. Who says that we're going to be in different sides? I thought that would be for discussion at a public meeting when you get input on what's going on. I mean, if it is political, I think the five of us need to be involved, not just two. That's my view, because you're making an assumption that you're going to be on one side and I'm going to be on the other side. Who is to say that that's the case? So I find a little bit of difficulty with that. I do understand your concern, nevertheless, that perhaps it's a long, drawn-out process, but I don't want to pre-screen it for the council members as to what is easy and what is not based on our political views of the matter. The pre-screening just doesn't rub me the right way.
I'm not looking to screen it. I'm just looking to divide the questions in a logical way. Councilmember Costa.
Councilmember Lingle, did you want to go first? Did you have
you hit the light
That's
first.
okay.
Mr. Mayor, if you'd just give us a concrete example. You said there's some property this side of the river that has been a problem. Just give us an example of that specific piece of property. I think that'll clarify everything for us.
Okay, so for instance, there is the strip of land that was formerly Caltrans right-of-way that runs from Highway 246 along the west bank of the river down to the Schuyler property, as an example. And that parcel is currently in the county, and we currently pay the county property taxes on it, a very substantial amount. But in the past, it has been bundled together with Riverbend, bringing Riverbend Park into the city, and/or bringing the riverbed into the city, which we received a report from the city attorney on. So if I were posing those questions, my question would be, shall we bring in the land from the top of the riverbank to the city limit line, which is west of the river? And my second question would be, shall we bring in the land that is within the riverbed? And my third question would be, shall we bring in the land that is within River Park? That's what I'm looking for, so that we can take each of those issues individually, talk about the merits and demerits of each of those issues, and then make a decision on that issue and then go on to the next one, rather than trying to take it all in one bite and going, well, I don't like this part, so I've got to vote no on all the rest of it, when I really would probably happily vote yes on one of the other parts. That's what I'm looking for.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
To maybe help the discussion, you won't be required to have, or the council wouldn't be required to have to vote all or none. You could, during your discussion, have that discussion and say, well, we want this chunk in and that chunk not.
that hasn't proven to be successful when it was discussed by prior councils, and I would like to make it simpler this time around. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. And I definitely understand your standpoint in doing that. I think as a council member, it makes it much easier to understand and to grasp and to digest. My one concern is for the folks who are very invested in this issue. What you're doing is asking them to, I'm assuming this is over multiple council meetings?
No, I think it could be.
Oh, in the same evening?
Yeah, just, and I think the advantage of it is that some of these, from my perception, are very simple, straightforward decisions, and I don't think there's a lot of issue with them. I could be wrong. People could raise concerns that I haven't seen yet, and we could get through those, and then we could get to the issues where we really need to give serious consideration and look at the alternatives and have more time on those without being pressured to make a better decision. That's my goal.
And although I understand that, a lot of issues that you come to when you're looking at information is how questions are couched. So what you're doing is you're couching the question a certain way, and that may provide a predisposition to the answer. And I'm not saying that that will necessarily be the case in this instance, but I'm open to that. I would just prefer that staff does that instead of ad hoc committee. That would only be my difference in opinion on that. Thank you.
Okay. What does everybody else think? Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Martner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do agree that because there is a general, there will be a predisposition, perhaps unintended, to answer yes or no to certain. I think we need to have the technical staff, which is basically the planning, to say, this is one parcel that can be dealt individually with one answer, yes or no. That's another parcel, that's another parcel, and that's another parcel, and really separate it out so we can discuss it during the open session and take them one at a time, as you are suggesting. I really would like to remove the political side in this predisposition. I really think that probably the staff is really the most appropriate body to try to analyze this and break it down in such a way that it can be swallowed easy by the council members, which is kind of the idea here. So I will support Council Members Costa that it's a good idea, but I think that the staff needs to propose it and execute it.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, to not shift the consternation you have in doing it by a group of two to the staff, my suggestion would be, if you want to have it broken down, that the staff have some objective way of determining it, and the only objective way that comes to mind right now is parcel by parcel. That whatever the legal parcels are, we just take them one at a time. And we could do that. We could do that with all of them in front of you. We just focus on one at a time. Unless the staff feels more comfortable in coming up with how to package them.
Well, let me say one thing with regard to that that's kind of problematic, and this is the one that got me thinking about it. We, the city, own a parcel which basically encompasses the baseball field, and this is just from my recollection of looking at the green map, which shows all the city parcels. We own a parcel there which encompasses the baseball field, the river, and land on the other side of the river, which in my mind are three separate questions. And so that's why I have a concern with that. And I think because of your report on the river boundary, my thoughts range to the ones on this side of the river in several categories there, the river itself, and those that are on the other side of the river. And that's why I was kind of going in a different direction. Maybe if we distributed the potential map to everybody and everybody drew some lines and sent it back and said, this is kind of how I'd like to see it, the staff could come up with
we won't be able to do that outside of a public meeting.
Okay. So, Councilmember Lingle, what do you think?
You know, I was on the planning commission, I've been through this with the council, and I believe that we can, when it's brought up, we can discern the different pieces of property or different parcels during the discussion. So I'm going to have to agree with the attorney on this one. I think we can go ahead and separate them at that time.
Okay. Councilmember Starbuck?
I think I can figure it out.
So, parcels it is. I think we do. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. Everybody in favor of parcels, turn on your light. That didn't work. Okay.
Actually, Mr. Mayor, we're not doing anything. I mean, so we're not doing anything. We're just letting it status quo. It'll come to us as it was planned to come to us. So there's no need for a vote.
Mr. Mayor, by his reference to what I said, it was the first thing I said, not the parcel thing.
Okay, back to where we were. I still think the parcel thing is the solution then. I don't want to take it as a lump and start working it down piece by piece. I want to move more smoothly. So hopefully there's a second and a third. Councilmember Costa.
Not to add thank you, Mayor Led, not to add a third opinion, but I wanted to stick to my prior suggestion, which is allowing staff to break it up on the agenda for us. But not necessarily by parcel. We'll leave that up to their decision.
I'm good with that too. So, can we got 3 for that? Yes?
No, I think we need to leave it as the status quo, and I think that we can break it out up here. That's my opinion, as how it was suggested first.
Okay. And who would like to, besides me, who would like to have the staff break it up some way?
I would.
Okay. That's a second.
Let me ask just a quick question here. Now, we're going to be dealing with different forms than what Planning Commission has been dealing with. So everything that we're being fed is all of a sudden we're going to take the Planning Commission recommendations and break those into one unit.
They didn't have a recommendation.
No, but they didn't make a recommendation, but there was recommendations available. So what we intend to do basically is look at that recommendation, and that would be that. Is that where we're going with this?
No, that's part of the problem is they weren't able to reach a conclusion. I don't want to end up in the same place, so that's why I'd like to get this divided up by some means.
I would support staff going ahead and doing that then.
Okay, and that's 3. So let's go on to the next item. Is anyone else on the council that has a council agency requests and announcements? Seeing none, we'll go to unfinished business, and I previously read the item, which is number 8, ordinance number 1579, and our city attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item is coming back to you because on October 4th, you accepted the recommendation of the Airport Commission to make some changes to the Airport Commission membership. You concluded that you wanted to add 2 non-voting members, and those 2 non-voting members would be from the Lompoc School District area, not just the city of Lompoc. And so this ordinance that's on the agenda for first reading is to accomplish that direction.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. City Attorney Pannoni, I had one question. At the background discussion, you say the 2 new positions would also be selected by the City Council, but there's a lack of a period, so I was curious if at large, if those words were not included in the sentence, or if there was anything missing from that sentence?
No, it was because the other 5 are already selected by the City Council, so it was just making it clear that the 2 new ones were also going to be by the City Council as opposed to be appointed by the Commission itself.
Thank you.
Any other questions at this time? Okay, I'd like to open this for public comment. Who would like to speak to this issue? Seeing no one rise, we'll bring it back to the council. Is there any further discussion, or would somebody like to make a motion? Any further discussion? No. Oh, yes. Councilmember.
I was going to go ahead and make the motion.
Okay, go ahead and make a motion.
I recommend that we waive further reading and introduce ordinance number 1579, parentheses 11.
And a second, please.
Second.
And is there any further discussion on this item at this time? Seeing no lights lit, could we vote, please? And that passes 5-0. And I think this would be a pretty good moment for a 10-minute break so everybody can stretch and... Okay, let's come on back. We will go to item number 5, the Lompoc Fire Foundation license agreement for TV show Lompoc Fire Responding. Battalion Chief Stan Hart.
Honorable Mayor, council members, I'm here to give a brief staff report on the city entering into an agreement with the Lompoc Firefighter Foundation to permit the filming of the program Lompoc Fire Responding. It's a 30-minute program showing firefighters training, working, and responding to emergencies. It's a definitive documentation that firefighters are actually out there working hard to save the public. This agreement would allow members of the Firefighters Foundation to ride along on city equipment and film them as they work and respond in action. The program's exciting, it's informative, it's got some pictures of me, and the best part of it all is that it doesn't cost the city anything. So with that, I'd like to recommend that the city approve the use agreement between the city and the Lompoc Firefighter Foundation and adopt Resolution 573111.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you for this information. I was curious, was this report taken to the Public Safety Commission as well?
No, I don't believe so. Jeff, was it? No.
Yeah, I want to make sure that they're being utilized, and that's why I mentioned earlier to Chief Dabney as well to try to get them involved. So I understand that the foundation approached the city. My hope is that in the future we take more of these items through the Public Safety Commission and get their feedback. For little things like, I noticed the name changed. I know that this item was pulled previously and it had a different name. Is that correct?
I believe it's always been Lompoc Fire Responding. Yep. I'm going to have private citizen come up and answer your questions.
The other times, it was actually a license agreement was the title of it, and we changed it to a use agreement.
Okay, it was a use agreement, but the name of the actual program was always called LFR, or did that name change as well?
No, that was always
Lompoc Fire Responding.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's all my questions. Thank you, citizen.
Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief States, just for the record for the public, I know it's in the report here, but if you could point out that this agreement does point out that the Fire Foundation has an insurance policy. I believe it's up to $1 million.
I believe it's $1 million. I don't
$1 million for liability purposes. So it's, if the citizens are concerned about liability to city equipment or anything else, or maybe to the liability, they do have their own insurance policy for that, if you just want to verify that.
Yes, they have the policy, and it's like any other vendor that does work for the city. To be on city property, they have to have that insurance policy.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Citizen. Yeah, just a question for the city attorney. I assume you've read through all this and life is good.
I've read through it all.
And life is good.
And I approve the agreement.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll have public testimony on this. Who would like to speak on this subject? Come on down.
Evening, Mayor, members of the council. Ralph Harmon, Vice President of the Firefighters Foundation. As you know, any of you that work with nonprofits, In these economic times, it's more difficult every day to raise money. And one of our primary purposes is to raise money to purchase equipment for the fire department. Our other goals are education. And this program does multiple things, not only for the community, but for the foundation. It keeps our name out there, keeps us very visible, and provides a lot of educational material for the members of our community. So we would appreciate that this gets approved so that we can improve our program. Yes, we do have insurance, and the city is named as an additional insured, as the city attorney requested in the document. We went back and forth, and I know he's read it more than once. I sure have. So just with that, we'd like approval of this so we can get on with business. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this? Seeing no one rise, we'll close all communication and come back to the council for discussion. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. I think that this is going to be a wonderful program. I'm very excited to see this. I know that they do this in other communities in the county, and so I think that this is a value-added program to our local TV station, and I really appreciate the foundation for coming forward and doing that. I see that it's going to be a 30-minute monthly series. My hope is that it's very successful, and we can maybe even do more than monthly, but I think it's a wonderful start. And with that, I'd like to move that the council approve the use agreement between the City of Lompoc and the Lompoc Firefighters Foundation for the production of Lompoc fire responding until terminated by either party for cause by adopting resolution number 5731, parens 11, and authorize the fire chief to execute a use agreement between the City of Lompoc and the Lompoc Firefighters Foundation.
And a second?
A second.
And is there any further discussion? Seeing no lights lit, could we vote, please? And that passes 5-0. And now we move on to item 10, the Economic Development Committee report from our Economic Development Director, Assistant City Administrator, Teresa Galavan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. At the October 18th meeting, we discussed the Economic Development Committee and made some amendments to the description to include providing a forum. The committee would provide a forum for ongoing dialogue on economic development issues between city government and private sector. We also added that impact factors or measurements would be part of the semi-annual review process, that the 15 members would be from the following sectors that we discussed. Those sectors are education, the Vandenberg Air Force Base or aerospace, medical industry, manufacturing commercial, Federal Correctional Institute or public safety, agriculture, the wine industry, tourism, retail services, contractors, tradesmen, or professional services, the auto industry, finance, real estate, energy, information technology or high tech, and then the commuter or resident at large. In addition, we discussed members having a 4-year term that would start in February, or that would go till February of 2016. Under further consideration, the idea is proposed that we would actually stagger the terms so that there would be senior members of the committee at all times as committee members change for continuity. So those are the recommendations, and if council approves this evening, we can open up the application period tomorrow for a 2-week application period.
Councilmember Starbuck.
I like it, but I have a question or a suggestion.
Okay.
I think that maybe in this, the one thing that we're missing is somebody that could help you with this committee. And I think that if we were to take into consideration that maybe we should talk to Mr. Ostini and just give him a co-chair, so to speak. That way, if you're unable, you're out of town, we don't have to have the chamber CEO filling out an application to be on an economic development committee. It would be a good working mixture, I feel, between yourself and him, and if we could include him as like the on that to assist you with that. And I think that these people that you have, if we can get the applications and fill what you've listed in here, I think we'll be doing good. But if we don't get it, I think we'll take what we can, and we're going to make a darn good effort at it. Thank you.
Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Starbuck, I like your suggestion. However, I'd like to leave that option up to our Economic Development Director. If you feel you'd like to have some assistance, by all means, go ahead and ask for Mr. Ostini, but it's really going to be your program, so you're not asking to give her directions on this, so it's going to be your program, and you do what you feel best with it. So.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. Councilmember Starbuck, I think that is a fabulous idea. I wish I would have thought of it myself. I think that having a strong line of communication is great, and I also think that he'd be perfect for the commission, but we don't want to have to use one of our appointments for somebody who's that integral to the process. So getting him involved in this, if not as co-chair, as something, I think is a wonderful idea. I also noticed that you added a sentence in the general functions first paragraph that include reporting of progress to benchmarks and other identified measures. Although it's minimal, it's vague, it's there, so I appreciate that, and I think that that's an important piece, and I think that you did a great job with all of our suggestions. The last thing I wanted to mention is I understand it's not included in the commission description, but I just wanted to confirm my request that staff provide commissioners with a starter kit, so to speak, of information and resources, including the city statistics, the CALED report, as well as additional suggestions for further research and reading that can also be provided to the council as well. Thank you.
Want to say something to that? To Councilmember Costas?
Oh, no, I'm fine.
Because I think you said once before that was your intent, didn't you?
Yes, we will definitely include a starter kit. I didn't feel it was part of the description, but I duly noted. Will do.
Councilmember Martiner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question, I guess. This is going to be advertised in the normal channels when there is a commission that opens or a committee that opens. I would like to know if it is possible for you to personally contact some of the stakeholders and let them know that there is a period in which the application is open. Would they be interested, somebody in their organizations? And my example of the stakeholders would be Allen Hancock College, the Purisima State Park. I mean, that's Board of Realtors, organizations that exist, within the community that have a big stake in economic development. Sometimes these applications, go out there, but people don't read it if they didn't read it, and they get missed. And a lot of times I hear, well, I didn't even know that there was an open application period. So if it is possible at all for you to spend perhaps a couple of hours personally contacting this organization and request and let them know that there is an application process open, and if they could let members of their organization know about it. If you could do that, I really would appreciate it. And my second question is in your 15 areas, I guess, or sectors, where do we put something like the Purisima State Park? Is that under tourism?
That would be
pretty
under
much?
tourism.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 3 questions, but I don't know if we want to have them here or during communication later on. I'll just put out the questions, and we, as the council, could decide if we want to discuss them now or if we want Teresa to address them. I'm still confused as to the process of selecting members. We're going to have people filling out these applications. I'm assuming that each council member will get a copy of each application. But then the process of it, are we going to, as council members, say that I want application 1, 5, and 6? That's one question. Okay. Does the city council nominee, if I nominate application number 1, just like other commissions, is that going to require a second by the council and the entire council then voting on that for a majority of that individual? And then I think the third question is addressed by the term "but not limited to." What if we don't get applicants from, say, 4 of the 15 categories? Do we hold those categories open, or do we just go with 15 members in the 12 categories? So those are some of the questions I'd like to either address now or when we have discussions later on.
Certainly. I'd be happy to address all the questions because there have been several comments that I'd want to get back on to. So, but if you want to.
No, go ahead.
Okay. In regard to calling all the organizations, I just want to be careful that we aren't omitting anyone, or that might not set some sort of, I agree we need to make sure people and community stakeholders know about this process. If there is any precedent for which ones we call or a process that we need to take, maybe this be advertised typically on the website. It has been in the paper quite a bit. I've had several calls, and those people who have called, we did indicate we would call them back when the period opened. Beyond that, when you get to, say, a sector like retail, if there's an overriding body, you know, I guess that's my concern, is that if we call one but you don't call another, is that going to be a problem later for us as a council? So.
I guess I didn't think that you need to address the 15 points. I'm only thinking of things like the Purísima State Park. I mean, you know, that's a large body in this community. Would they feel discriminated if we don't call some other park a state park around here? Well, that's the only one. So I don't see that they would feel, you know, that they're being picked over something else. I don't know if there is an issue now. There is, you know, the application is open at large and it's advertised, so it's just really reminding certain organizations that this is open, not necessarily say, you know, have somebody apply. You know, it's just, you know, are you aware that this is open? That's all I meant. Is that some legal issue with that?
Okay, very good.
Let me interrupt you just a second.
Sure.
City Administrator, is there a policy that we've generally followed in the past with something like this, or is this rather unique?
Well, it's really a decision that, you know, it's up to you. But in the past, it's been noticed in the paper, on the website, as Economic Development Director Teresa Gallivan noted that those are, and, you know, what else do we do, City Clerk?
We can email.
Yeah, we can email. But it's really a decision that you can make. And
Maybe all of us can take on the responsibility of contacting the people we can think of, too, because we all have a wide range of contacts in the community. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. I plan on, definitely spreading the word. But you use the word call, but Councilmember Martiner, I think that we would accept any form of communication. So a mass email, and then request, hey, you know, please forward this on to anybody else you know, any other business owners or any other, you know, folks you think would be interested. And I think that that will get around town pretty quickly, and I think that you'll have a really good spread that way. You know, we're not going to hound you if you miss one or two. I think that it's just getting the word out, and sometimes that's what it takes. So mass email, I think, would be the best.
That's a good idea.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yes, the recommendation about having Ken Ostini as the chamber CEO as an ad hoc committee member, I think that definitely we want to have the representation from the chamber involved very heavily, and had foreseen that being a very strong working relationship. So I would work with that, and then we can take it from there. He and I can work out the details of how we structure that within the committee. It would be my recommendation. But Ken and I will work very closely. That would be my intent. The other would be the process of selecting members. We can take, each council member could take an area. There are 15 areas, so each council member could decide on 3 industries that they wanted to select. This would be one way we could ensure that we get that broad representation. If there are not applications for certain areas, we could have another one from, say, retail, and have 2 different retail sectors. So that could be represented. That's one option. or two different completely, private aerospace and more of the military side of aerospace. So we're getting some different perspectives. The other question was, would council vote on the individuals or the slate? And my understanding is that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but that it would be the slate, that you would come forward with your recommendations and the slate would be approved by the entire council. So it wouldn't be individual by individual, but. Okay.
Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Regarding council members picking an area, the way it's working out for me, and I give you the example, I have had individuals that have approached me and said that they're interested in being part of this nomination, interest in being members of the Economic Development Committee. So I haven't really looked and said, well, but if I get these other three areas, I cannot pick you. So I like to keep it open, because really what it boils down to is still the council members' nomination. We nominate. If it happens to be that we're all going to nominate people from the wine industry, then perhaps we get into a problem there. But I think what we need to do here is first, people approach us, we have an interaction, what is your interest, where, and then from then on, bring the fourth into a public meeting and say, this is my nomination. And I don't see how else are we going to, I don't see how else I can tell a member of the public, well, I'm sorry, I cannot nominate you because I was giving retail, parks, and something else. I feel that I still have to take the public's input and respond to their request in one way or another. I mean, I guess I could refer them to another council member, but that all needs to be done in the public meeting anyway, right?
And I think all council members would receive all applications. So that was another part of the equation I had to answer.
Right. So somebody that has approached me, I'm going to say, please do apply. Chances are that none of the council members know that person, and I'm the only one that knows that person. So it is my duty to nominate that person, because I'm not going to go and tell council member Costa or Starbuck, well, you better nominate so-and-so because it's not part of my area. You know what I'm saying? So it really boils down to, who do we know that we're asking them to apply, and then if we happen to think that that person is appropriate, we need to bring it forth up here. I mean, I don't see any other way that we're going to be able to do that. And if we have an issue of not enough representation, we're going to have to go through the process and try to work it out. But other than that, I don't see how I can, dismiss somebody just because it's not in the area that I was given.
No, I don't want anybody being dismissed. We want all people to come forward in this process that are interested. How we go about organizing, how it's selected, can be played out in a couple different ways. So,
Mind if we take a break and take public comment?
That's fine. I was just going to make a comment here that says the committee members will be selected from but not limited to. So there's room to move here.
Okay. Is there someone in the audience that would like to speak to this issue? Come on down.
Mr. Mayor and Council, my name is Dwayne Holmdahl. I'm a resident of the city of Lompoc. I'm very pleased with what you have in here today, and there's only a couple comments, and one's already been taken care of. On that first page, it says, committee will provide forum for ongoing dialogue and economic issues between city government and private sector. I think you should also put government sector in there, because you got Mission Hills, Vandenberg Village, you got other areas that you could be in, so that it doesn't limit them. So if you're talking about some property or adding to it. I did find out that, I finally read it in the paper, I was going to say on that last one, initial members will serve the 4 years. It should be half will serve for 2 and the other, it's got to change, and I think that's it. The program you have, you're going to have people put in applications, and you're going to have the decision of who you're going to put there. And you got individuals in this town who are going to put their names in it, have a multiple background. they're not all straight line one way or the other. So I think you're going to have somebody to cover all of it. So there's going to be people in there. I think that I'm very pleased to see the program, and there's going to be a lot coming out of this on economic development and as a cross section. And I'm really pleased to see that you're looking at Mission Hills and Vanderbilt Village and outside of the area. A lot of times we forget, but those people do come to town. They do spend their money inside the city limits, and there's times they want to be involved with us. Even though Vanderbilt Village doesn't want us to annex, and they still come down and spend their money. But I think it's a real good program. Teresa's done an excellent job on it in your conversation. But I think you're going to have names come in. They're going to be on the list, and you'll make your determination of where they're at. Now, if you're not going to have all from the wine industry, you're not going to have, so maybe some will have to, once they start looking at it, play with that so you have a broader spectrum of individuals. But you got several good businesses coming to town. You got some real good lists of individuals, of organizations and businesses that are involved in there, and I think that's all I had.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Judy Taggart, City of Lompoc, representing the Healthy Lompoc Coalition. I am Project Director for the Healthy Lompoc Coalition, and I serve as Community Health Director for the Lompoc Valley Community Healthcare Organization. And I just wanted to come tonight to speak on this issue. We're so very pleased that we have Ms. Gallivan here and that this committee will be moving forward. When we looked at the list of sectors that would be represented, we felt compelled that I come here and suggest that you also consider having someone from public health. The medical community is listed on the list, but medical is often considered treatment, whereas public health is very much more focused on prevention, policy, and environment. And our coalition focuses a great deal on programs and projects in the community that support those public health issues that involve multiple sectors. And we feel that it's very important to consider that, if not to have an additional representative, because we appreciate that brevity on a committee often makes it more functional. But if there's not a representative for public health serving on the Economic Development Committee, we would then at least suggest that you consider making health one of the drivers in that community policy. There's more and more emerging research in the field that shows that the healthy communities who make pedestrian and bicycle accessible areas in their downtown have reaped large economic benefits, both from tourism, retail sales, from their local residents having more discretionary income from riding their bike, which costs $120 a year, versus driving a car, which can cost on average $7,000 a year. They're taking that extra money that they have now, since they're not driving every day, and spending it in the community. So those are the kinds of issues that we hope that will be considered, that we can make this a healthier community, not just fiscally healthier, but actually physically healthier for everyone that lives here. So we just hope that you would consider that as you move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this? Seeing no one rise, we'll close oral communication, come back to the council. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. My suggestions then would be, thank you to the public for your comment. I would like to add on committee function number 5, issues between city government, other governmental entities, and the private sector. Just to include that, other governmental, because I think that that's a very great suggestion. We do need to work with them as far as the economy is concerned. And committee function number 7, I believe there should be a colon after the word valley, not a period. But on number 3, can we put medical/public health? Those would be my suggestions to add. Thank you.
I had the same suggestion to add public health on number 3, medical/public health. I think that's great. Thank you.
I see Teresa looking like she wants to say something. No? Okay. Yeah, I'm good with both of those. Are there any other? I guess the only question we have left is how the appointment process would work. I would happily take
any of the three categories that someone else doesn't want to take. I think it would be smoother if we each picked three categories by whatever means and made our best effort to accommodate someone in that category, and failing to find the person that fit the category or finding someone we felt would be more valuable to the committee, we made that appointment. And from my standpoint, I view this, each council member's appointments are each council member's appointments, and unless one of you nominates Dracula, I'm going to vote for the people you pick out. I don't know which one of you on my right was first. Councilmember Lingle.
So, Mr. Mayor, is it your intention tonight we select the categories?
I'm simply offering that as an alternative.
No. You know, my preference would be, I'd like to see the applications before, I may select a category that I know nothing about anyone in education or manufacturing. So my suggestion, or what I'd like to see, is that we wait, get all the applications in, let us see those, and then select a category. I'd be more comfortable with that.
I'm good with that too. Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah, I was going to kind of mirror that. I think that personally, that when we get all the applications, we all get them, we select the three, we put it out. If we come up with doubles, then we can work it from there. I mean, there might be three dynamic people that work in tourism that wind up in there, and we have to forego somebody in the manufacturing. You know, I mean, we just don't know who's going to apply, and I think we should have all of it in front of us and then just go with it.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. I'm going to agree with the other council members with the idea that it would probably be smart once we get all of the applications to actually have a second and a third option, or I guess it'd be a fourth and a fifth option in the case that another council member already, you know, in case that there's doubling up. So, you know, we pick the three that we think would work best for us as our commissioners, but also have additional as well, so that we were prepared during appointments. Thank you.
Okay, so it appears to me that there's consensus on that.
Mr. Mayor, if I could add one more thing.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Ling, I didn't see your light.
I sort of envision it, you know, each of us have, let's say, 32 applications in front of us. And then one of us, somehow we pick who's going to nominate the first person. And let's say it's Councilmember Starbuck, and Councilmember Starbuck says, you know, of these 32, I'd like to see ABC, okay? Then, Mr. Mayor, you're the second one, and ABC is selected, then you, of the remaining 31, you get to select someone. I'd like to see it sort of happen that way. We come up with a slate then of the 15 between us, and then as Councilmember Costa said, we may have some that are duplicated, and then we go through and can we adjust it from that point on. It's kind of the process I envisioned it to be.
Councilmember Martiner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The way that I envision the process is I would look at the applications, then I would call that individual and sit down and talk with them. And once I make a decision and I said, yeah, you know, I think this would be a very good addition, I would talk to that individual and I said, I would like to nominate you. Now, that individual might have been contacted by another council member, and there might be duplicate nominations. So all of that is going to work itself out before we even get up here, in a way. I mean, we're thinking that we're going to go here, and it's like, I like X, Y, and Z, but remember that I think at one point in time we have to meet these individuals, meet with them, talk with them, and then decide. And at that point, communicate to them, I would like to nominate you. And if they're being already approached by some other council member, that person is going to tell you. So then you go back, okay, well, so if so-and-so is going to nominate you, I'm going to go back to the application list and call X other people. So there's going to be a pre-screening process that occurs by default when we engage in this process, which is to talk to the applicants and then let them, let them know how we think about them. So why don't we just kind of let the process go, as opposed to try to regiment it beforehand and then see if we get into a situation where we would have to, do something else.
Let me, just a second.
So, Mr. Pannoni, if we had 3 council members talking to the same applicant, does that present us with any problems?
No, as long as the applicant doesn't tell the 3 of you what the other one said.
Okay. Just checking. Councilmember Lingle.
Yeah, I just want to comment on Councilmember Martiner's comment, and I agree with your suggestion. I don't think it contradicts anything I was saying. I fully intended that, yes, we'd all contact the people we were interested in at the application once we review the applicants, and then we'd still be able to go down the list and nominate those. So I agree with what you're saying. I don't think it has anything, says anything different than what I was trying to say anyway. So thank you.
Okay, so let me recap. We're going to make 2 changes. We're going to add local government, private sector and local government to item number 5. We're going to add public health to 7 sub 3. And we're going to have all of those applications brought back to the council, and at that point we'll take a look at it and make a final decision on the process by which we make the selection. If I got that right, because if I do, it's a motion. And looking for a second.
I'll second it.
Okay. And did I misstate anything before we go forward? I'm sorry, that's correct. Other. I wrote local. Other. I correct my motion. Do you accept the second?
Second.
Okay. And is there any further discussion? Seeing none, could we vote, please? And that passes 5-0. And now, item number 11, the resolution establishing a fund balance policy for the general fund pursuant to GASP Statement number 54. Our very own Brad Wilkie.
Mayor, council members, generally speaking, GASB is how you say that. So, this item is a requirement for the city and also for the redevelopment agency pursuant to GASB Statement number 54, which is been in the works for quite a while. The implementation date is for fiscal years ending June 30th, 2011 and later. So this would apply to our financial statements that we will be issuing for the last fiscal year. The primary purpose of this, and there was several years of activity that went into creating this statement, but the primary reason for it is to create some consistency amongst agencies across the nation for reporting purposes, so outside entities can better compare individual agency reports, not just within California, but across the nation. For the city and for entities within California, there are several things that are unique to the California legislature. COPS funding is one of them that we report on our financial statements that an entity in Nebraska wouldn't have any reason to be doing because they don't have that same funding mechanism. I'm going to go through my staff report utilizing the slides just for my benefit to arrange it. There are 2 general reasons for why we need to have this fund balance report policy approved. The first is it's required for us to have it in our financial statements, and if we don't do it, we would have a qualified opinion on our financial statements. So for the purposes of what I'm asking the governing board to do is kind of broken down into 2 general categories. The main classification changes that this statement requires, which is almost ministerial. It prescribes how the reports will start to look going forward from 2011 and on. But one of the fairly controversial items of GASB 54 was how to deal with reserve policies that many agencies have. We have a substantial amount of reserves that we have had in the general fund. What the fund balance policy provides for is some guidance as to how to report those existing stabilization funds, and that's why they call them stabilization arrangements, because there's many different names that people apply to them. So that also is something that is done in a consistent manner. The classification system changes are fairly straightforward. We have, and I do have to make sure that everybody realizes this is for reporting purposes. This wouldn't change how we take care of our budgeting process. It doesn't change how we manage our programs within the city. It just is so the reports that are presented to the outside world are done in such a way that it's fairly consistent from one agency to another. So our Economic Uncertainty Fund, which has always been reported in the past as a special revenue fund, we've always considered it as part of our general reserves, but that will now become part of the general fund for reporting purposes on our financial statements. The same thing with our COPS block grant monies and some of the library funds, and there's many more that we will be doing consolidations. From a practical point of view, what those will do is our financial statements are about 120 pages long. There's probably 8 or 10 pages worth that are dedicated special revenue funds. We will probably cut that down to maybe 3 or 4, that we may have no more than 5 or 6 special revenue funds that we report going forward. All the rest of them would be consolidated into the general fund or categorized differently, possibly in debt service funds or capital improvement funds. The second part of the proposed policy is to outline some of the ways that we would define our stabilization fund. And we've always talked about reserves. This is talking about basically the available reserves that could be used for expenditures. There are things that can't be used because they're already spent. A good example of that is the redevelopment agency has gotten loans from the general fund to buy and provide for parking in the downtown area. These loans are being paid back by the agency over time. The loan receivable balance that's on the general fund is part of the reserves, but we can't spend that money on anything because it's just a note that's being paid back to us over time. So that note is actually going to be a reserved component of fund balance. So what we're trying to look at is, for the purposes of your decision-making authority, of those reserves that are undedicated, available, do you want to show those as part of the stabilization fund, or do you want to have them so that they could be utilized for future budgets, current expenditures, things like that? And I think the direction that I've seen over the last couple of budgets is that we'd like to preserve our available fund balance, our spendable fund balance, to be able to have them available for some specific rainy day that might happen in the future. And that gets me down to the third item on here, which is if there is a stabilization component to the reserve, the Statement 54 suggests that you have 3 components that make that up. It doesn't necessarily talk about the dollar amounts. It talks about how you use those reserves and how you create those reserves. A stabilization arrangement is not required, but if you do decide to have one, and I'm recommending that we do have one, it asks for guidelines to be followed. The 3 items are: come up with an appropriate level of funds to be held in this reserve, and to have a certain criteria that creates that dollar amount. Some agencies have set point of what the reserve should be. Some other agencies have a range from a minimum to a maximum. For the purposes of what we're doing, I'm suggesting that we have a range, and then we can move into that as we go along. It also prescribes that we should have specific circumstances, specific criteria for when those reserves could be spent down. And it also, if you do spend it down and get below the minimums, it requires you to have a methodology for how you're going to replace those reserves and get back into the targeted range between the minimum and maximum. So instead of just saying we want to have $10 million of reserves, you have to say this is why you have $10 million of reserves, the reasons why you might dip into those reserves, and then once you do dip into the reserves, how much time you want to have to be able to replenish those reserves. The policy that I put together, which was based on 3 other cities, including the city of Santa Maria and a few others in the Los Angeles area, I have included in the body of the policy the steps that I took to get to these numbers. But the range that I'm suggesting that we implement at this point in time is between $4.2 and $4.6 million. The 4.6 is based on specific components. I'll go into those next. There's criteria that I have in the policy, but the bottom line is that based on those criteria, these are the dollar amounts that we initially are suggesting be set aside for the specific components of the reserve. And this is the higher number reserve. The other reserve is basically 2 months worth of our operating revenues, our operating expenses for a fiscal year, one single year, not our 2-year budget. The criteria that was used for this is to, I'll use sales tax as an example. The $140,000 is what I've seen the fluctuation in the component of sales taxes that's related to fuel, which seems to be the one item that fluctuates widely over the last 3 or 4 years. So sometimes we get an abundance of monies from sales tax from fuel because the cost of fuel is so high. And sometimes when fuel prices go down, that number drops dramatically. And their suggestion is that of the reserve level, $140,000 of it is related to that fluctuation. So we can manage what we are budgeting into the future based on that. From my point of view, from the budgeting point of view, what this does is it actually helps out the budgeting process, because if you've had years where you've had a lot of growth in a certain component, I have a slide near the end that talks about this, you can set aside some of those for a rainy day, and in hindsight, there's some things that were quite a bubble. Property taxes are one of them over the last 3 or 4 years that have slid off significantly. And if we had had this policy in place in 2006, we would have been able to weather that storm probably a little bit better than we had. We were able to do it quite well, but this would have been another tool that we would have had to utilize. I picked on the revenue base because it's the largest component of the suggested reserve level, but it also kind of points out some of the benefits that we have as opposed to some of the other agencies in California. When I talk about the revenue base, I'm talking about the major components of revenue that comes into the general fund to support our appropriations. And we actually have 4 to 5 major components of revenues that support our general fund, with an additional 17% roughly that's made up of several different things. And having 4 or 5 is quite robust. It allows us to have not to rely on any single number. Some agencies only have 1 or 2, and they're solely dependent on, there's one agency I know about that's 90% based on sales tax. So if sales tax goes way down, their ability to provide services goes way down immediately. If you're diversified, you're a little bit more insulated from that. Our revenue base is made up of several items, but the five top primary ones are property tax, sales tax, bed tax, administrative service charges, operational transfers into the general fund, and then everything else. And that's a really good mix. The proposed, the blue book on GASB 54 says you have less risk, basically, if you're diversified, and you can therefore have a lower percentage of reserves because of that. If we had 75% of all of our revenues and property taxes, we may want to have a 30% reserve, but with the breakdown that we have, the recommendation from GASB 54 is that we probably can be closer to 5 to 10%, which still creates a fairly large number, $2.3 million, but it's not as much as if we were relying on one source. I mentioned earlier about the ability to set money aside, but also to use it. This is a backwards-looking slide, so it's kind of 20/20 hindsight. But the blue bar is supplemental taxes that we collect, that we get from the county for property transfers during each individual fiscal year. And the average that we have is around $50,000 to $60,000 a year. And if you were looking at Prop 13, then you would think you would probably get 2 to 3% a year growth just because of the Prop 13 factor. So and this is what I was talking about earlier about it would make my budgeting life much easier if we just, for budget purposes, estimated that we're going to get 2% more than the average over the time period. And if we get an extraordinary windfall like we did in the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, we could set that money aside for the inevitable times when you get a period like this where the numbers are much lower than what the average was. And this ability to do this is outlined in the policy to say we should only budget X percent every year for budget purposes, and at the end of the year, if we got more than that, we put some of that aside into the specific reserve for the times when we are below that number. And if we get below that number, we can utilize some of those reserves to support what we had otherwise budgeted. So this is quite a change from what has been reported in the past, and I don't want to minimize it, but it's one thing that it does is allows for bond agencies to start looking at financial statements like they do with businesses, so they can look at common denominators, and that's what they're looking for municipalities and other governmental entities. The part that has a lot to do with the governing boards here is that you have some say-so about how you want to categorize the reserves. Part of the policy recommends that the signed balances, which are things that could be happening down the road but aren't quite set yet, should be and recommended to be set by administration. The recommendation here is that the city administrator has that authority, but if you want to go to the next level up, which is committed fund balances, that would be done by the action of the board or the council, whichever one we're talking about for RDA or the city. And the reason why that's important, and that's actually specified in the policy guidelines of the GASB 54, is that to be able to make that change, if another board or another 10 years down the line, somebody wants to make a change to that, the only way that they could change that is by a resolution. This is being done by resolution, and to change it, it has to be done by resolution. So it provides one more level of authority to be able to make that distinction. And right now, we don't really have that authority. The $2 million that we have in our uncertainty fund was set aside many, many years ago, and I think it was done by resolution. It doesn't change that, but it just makes that into a higher level of reserves than it currently is on financial statements. So it's quite a lot to change, but that's why I started this with saying that part of it is statutory. We have to implement this for our financial statements that we just completed, that we're working on getting out the door, but it also gives you the ability this year and going forward, and the city administrator and I have talked about incorporating this into our budget process, so at the next budget cycle we can review this to see if we're on target, if we want to change anything, if we want to beef it up, make changes, and at that point in time we could do that. This is a starting point. We'd be able to see how things go over the next couple of years, and then if the council decides to make a change, we can do it as part of that budget structure.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Mr. Wilkie, for your presentation. I think this is positive for a few reasons. First, one of the sentences in your background I think is very key. It says, with more concisely defined categories, the nature and extent of the constraints placed on a government's fund balance are clearer and more transparent. So anything that makes, government clearer and more transparent is great. The other thing is, we all know that the economy is cyclical. There's going to be peaks and valleys. Unfortunately, it's very tempting to spend all the money when you have higher revenues. So what you're doing is you're using a resolved council mandate to ensure that you're putting money aside for the rainy day. So I think that that's wonderful as well. I did have a question in regards to the Economic Uncertainty Fund. I know you addressed it. I'm still a little fuzzy on the action you would want from us this evening. And I also was curious I know that this is for the general fund. Is this something that we can look into for our other enterprise funds as well?
We have a policy for the electric fund, and it wouldn't necessarily be prescribed by GASB 54, but obviously we can have a policy on reserves for any of those. And the reason this is talking about the general fund and governmental funds in particular is because the general fund is where the most discretion is for an entity. For the business type activities that are the electric fund, the wastewater fund, and the internal service funds, they have to operate as a business, and they need to have a certain amount of cash flow to be able to operate. So to some extent, they're defined by the rate structure that's out there for those customers. And if we do a rate study for any of these utilities, we would obviously take a look and make sure that we're covering our costs. The costs that we have are appropriate, and that we have enough reserves to meet our debt obligations. And for water and wastewater, to some extent, our reserve policy is dictated by the bond covenants, because we have to have a 1.2 ratio for all of our revenues over our expenditures.
But that would be then looked into during the rate study process and not necessarily through a comprehensive policy such as this.
It could be done by policy, but the last time that we updated the solid waste rates, we were targeting a 20% reserve as a goal, and then during discussions it became a 10% goal. And by 2013, we'll see how close we got to that 10%, because we're rebuilding the reserves in that fund right now.
Wonderful. So then if you could just quickly address the Economic Uncertainty Fund. It sounds like this only affects the perception of health in the general fund, but you're not actually moving the funds. We're still keeping them separate.
Yeah, the Economic Uncertainty Fund is a separate fund on the books of the city. It's a separate bucket that we have set aside. I think we set aside it in the early 90s, and we did that on purpose so that any kind of interest revenues we got off that could be utilized by the general fund, but it was put aside to do that. And nothing about the way we manage that account will change. It's just for reporting purposes, that fund will now become a component of the general fund. And so that $2 million will just roll into the cash in the general fund for reporting purposes, and it will roll in as $2 million of the committed fund balances based on the policy.
Right, so that goes in again to the idea that this is about a perception of the health of the general fund, essentially.
Right, and during the last few cycles, we've had three components of the reserves that we've been stating to the public and to the council that these are the reserves that are available for the general fund, the economic uncertainty fund, the reserves that are in the general fund, and the AB 702 monies that is in an internal service fund, which is still available for use, but it's in an internal service fund that is managed like a business.
So I'm sorry, one last question. So then please tell me the distinction between the economic uncertainty fund and the rainy day fund as proposed.
The rainy day fund would be something you would only see in the financial statements, and it would be based on the ending financial statement information that's produced once the audit is completed. For the day-to-day operations, the economic uncertainty fund would still stay as an independent, separate fund within the city's structure of funds, and it wouldn't change at all. The operations for it wouldn't change at all. It's just when we report that on the financial statements to outside world and to our bondholders, it would show up as part of the general fund.
And so the policy that you were speaking of in regards to when you can use the funds and how quickly and in what ways you would replenish the funds, that was in regards to the rainy day fund, though, not the economic uncertainty fund.
Right. And we'd, for the purpose of those components, we'd add those all together to see if we meet our minimum obligations. And the economic uncertainty fund would be just one of those funds that we would add into to see if we're meeting our minimum obligations. We could turn the economic uncertainty fund into a fund that holds the reserves, and we wouldn't have any reserves in the general fund on a day-to-day basis, but we would have it in the economic uncertainty. We could do that. We don't need to do that, but we could.
It seems a little more comfortable that way, only because then you could have a policy and the one fund interconnected.
The only reason why I wouldn't quite suggest doing that is because we have 95% of the activity that we have goes through the general fund, and we wouldn't necessarily want to have the general fund with a deficit cash position. So by funding this reserve, we'd actually take money cash out of the general fund and put more money into the economic uncertainty fund. So for cash management purposes, we try to make sure we have positive cash balances on all of our funds. And because the general fund gets a majority of its cash twice a year from property taxes, there's a wild fluctuation in the general fund of cash, and having some of the reserves in there would help keep that from going down below zero. So,
thank you. Yeah. Again, back to the perception of health. Yeah. Thank you.
Councilmember Martiner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 3 years ago, we used the Economic Uncertainty Fund as a rainy day fund. That's how we balanced the budget. We took monies out of there because we were in this severe downturn.
Well, actually, what we did do is we tapped our AB 702 funds. So the money that's in our internal service fund, which is where AB 702 is what we drew down to pay for what we thought was going to be our $1.4 million reserve use.
My understanding was, and this is 3 years ago, it's not the last budget cycle, but the previous budget cycle, there was, and it was specifically stated that the Economic Uncertainty Fund was for the purposes of maintaining staff when times were not good. So it was being used for all practical purposes as a rainy day fund.
Yeah, it always has been. My understanding of the requirement of the AB 702 monies is what you just stated for that. So I think my understanding is that we've always used the AB 702 as the method to retain staffing, and that money is held in our internal service fund.
Okay. I'm still uncomfortable with having to put this in as part of the general fund for reporting purposes only. It is not clear to me why we need to do that. On the surface, it appears to be that we're just inflating the general fund with these monies that are really supposed to be only for rainy day purposes. So
keep in mind that the fund balance policy is consolidate into the general fund things that are general in nature. And these things are all, when we were looking at the reserves, we were looking at this uncertainty fund and the general fund interchangeably. That by eliminating the economic uncertainty fund and putting the money back in the general fund, you're not changing any characteristics of that rainy day fund. The policy that we're setting out here is setting out the criteria for that rainy day fund. We don't necessarily have to have that rainy day fund all in one place outside the general fund or in the general fund. We could. I'm not recommending that we make any real changes to the day-to-day operations of how we operate.
Okay, so I understand the point of putting some barriers, some boundaries on how the rainy day fund will be used. I'm all for that. In fact, I think I proposed it 3 years ago, and instead of just arbitrarily say, well, we're going to use reserves now. But that takes me really to the bigger, to a bigger thing, which is the concept of having a rainy day fund, okay, and the concept of looking at your last slide where there was a time period where there was really, $850,000 in revenues that were in excess of what usually the trend was. And you're saying, well, that's really good because we can put that in the rainy day fund, and that is a, that is not, how can I say this? That's a very government conservative approach to dealing with economics. In the private sector, when you have this kind of thing, you either use the monies to expand, right, and increase your revenues or your market share. You don't really say, I have to have a rainy day fund and that kind of thing. It's almost a mentality. Nowhere in here we're saying that really one other purpose that we need to be very conscious of at all times is efficiency. So if we're down here and we don't have excess revenues, and then when we have excess revenues, we put it in, underneath the mattress, so when we are down, where you're going to use those monies, but that doesn't really give an impression or a culture that the government is going to be a dynamic type of economic entity that is going to adjust, right? And so I'm a little concerned with saying, oh, well, this is good. It's good to have when we are in the up times, put this money away. But really, what we really need to be talking about, too, is efficiency within the government, okay? And not just, okay, it's the downturn and we don't have money, well, we're just going to take it out of our savings account. That's not how we individuals in our families kind of does budgeting every year. If there is no money coming in, we don't start drawing on our savings by default. So, it's a complex thing, but it bothers me to see that it's okay. I don't think it's okay. I really think that there's got to be somewhere else in the policy making that pushes us to become economically viable at all times and not just by default draw on reserve funds because they're there.
Right. Well, just keep in mind that this policy, the stabilization part of this policy, is only talking about the committed fund balance. There's also assigned fund balance, and there's also unassigned fund balance. Those other lower tier balances are those things that can be used for discretionary purposes. So if we're fully funded on our committed fund balance in, say, 2006, that $200,000 or $300,000 that we got would become part of the assigned or unassigned fund balance to be utilized to pay for some deferred maintenance, pay for equipment that hasn't been purchased because we deferred doing it because we didn't have the money during an economic downturn, or to look at a mechanism to start funding future public safety needs and those kind of things. So what you're saying is a little bit beyond what this policy is requiring, but this is at least setting up a criteria for what's in there. So if we end up having a year where we have $10 million extra that we've received during the year, it doesn't necessarily have to go into this committed fund balance. It could go into a assigned fund balance, and the council could give direction and said, we know this is one-time money we got, but let's utilize that for the best benefit of increasing the efficiency of the city.
Okay, so if there is excess revenues, there's going to have to be some level of a dynamic communication between, finances and the council to say, should we put this in the reserve funds in the rainy day, or should we take these monies and start a 5-year program to properly staff public safety, whatever. Okay, as one example. Yeah. So the default thing of just going into the rainy day fund is what is kind of bothering me. I think it needs to be brought up to the policymakers and say, there is this excess funds, what do you want to do with it?
Right, and that's why I suggested earlier on that this might be a review of this done as part of the budget process every 2 years. And this particular example that's up there on the screen is not really something you can do prospectively. So the policy that talks about supplemental taxes is basically after the fact. So that works right into your request to say in the 14-15 cycle, we will know how much extra we got in the 11-13 cycle, and then we can come to, finance can come to the board as part of the budgeting process that we got $250,000 more in supplemental property taxes than we had budgeted, and here's what we can do with it.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Martiner brought up some pretty interesting points, but and she sort of confused me. I'm sorry. So I want to clarify in my mind. On the one page where it says classification system changes, in bold print you say these general funds are for reporting purposes only, and you give the examples of the Economic Uncertainty Fund, the COPS block grant. My understanding when I was reading this is that you're putting them into the general fund for reporting purposes only, but they still are going to remain as separate funds. We're not going to, as I think I heard, correct me if I'm wrong, Councilman Martiner, we're not going to be using the Economic Uncertainty Fund as just general fund money. It's still going to be in a separate fund.
Correct. Yeah.
So we're not going to be using that to mow grass and pay our utility bills.
Right. And actually the COPS fund is probably a lot better example of that, because the law that created the COPS funding requires us to have that money in a separate category, separate bucket, separate fund, because we have to keep track of interest earnings that we get on that. So the state knows how much money we actually spent out of the $100,000 that we get. It's the $100,000 plus whatever kind of interest is earned. And they require us to keep that in a separate bucket. But for the purposes of operations and the effective use of that transaction, we're using that $100,000 to increase our ability to provide police services, because it's dedicated for police services. So in that regard, that money is general in nature because it's being used for a general fund purpose, police services. Because
one of the things Councilmember Martin said, and I agree with her, is that it almost appears as we're trying to falsely inflate the general fund. But
I think it's the other way around. We're actually, on the books, we're actually understating what the real fund balance of the general fund is, because for all intents and purposes, the Economic Uncertainty Fund was only created because at some time in the past, $2 million was moved out of the general fund into this fund so we could keep track of how much interest it earns on an individual basis. And the interest goes back in the general fund to be used for general expenditures.
Okay. Well, thank you for your report. I was going to mention either you have a extremely talented staff or you're an extremely intelligent person with a lot of organization, or maybe it's both.
I borrowed a lot, actually.
No, it's a very good report. But I do have one comment you made. When you're talking about the sales tax revenue, and you say it's hard to, it fluctuates so much, and you gave gasoline as an example. This is smart, but gasoline is a number of pennies per dollar. Or pennies per gallon, cents per
No,
gallon?
that's the excise tax, and that goes into gas taxes. But the sales tax component is based on dollars.
Okay, so it
So
is
if you have $4 gas, you're going to get more sales tax.
Okay, so
if you
the
have
excise
$2
tax,
gas,
okay.
you're going to have half as much.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
yeah.
Okay, let's see if we have anybody who would like to do public, I'm sorry.
I have one more question.
Okay. Councilmember Costa.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mary Lynn. On page 16 of 17 of Exhibit A, the last paragraph, the final sentence, it says, once the economy recovers, it is the intent to fund these 2 cyclic reserves with 2 budget cycles. When we're talking about the recovery of the economy, I think that's a little bit subjective. I know you mentioned it could occur as late as 2015 to 2017 budgetary cycle. Chances are things may not go back to the way they were in 2006 for many years to come. So I'm just curious when the economy recovers, what does that mean?
For this purpose, what it really means is if we have a positive result in any of our fiscal years, then we would start accumulating that money back into the reserves, because the reason that's there is to put a criteria on if you're deficient in what you have compared to what your goal is, to be able to get to that goal. And while if the economy keeps going down for 4 more years, we shouldn't expect to try to put those reserves back within a 2-year cycle. So once things start going even incrementally back up, we would start putting some of that money to meet the $4.5 million goal.
So when things go in a positive direction, even in the matter of thousands of dollars, we're going to start looking into doing that.
Yeah. A good example of that is for the 11-12 assessed values. The assessed values in the city, which was in the report that went into the paper last weekend, was $78 million on a $2.3 billion tax base. So it was 0.000 something % increase. But it didn't go down, which is what it did 2 years ago. So it's on the positive upswing, but it's effectively flat. So once we figure out if we've gotten any positive results for the 11-12 year, we'll see if we can start putting money back aside. And the goal is 2 cycles, but if we take 4 or 5 years of very small incremental additions to get there, then that's what it takes.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, is there someone out there who would like to speak to this subject? Nope. Okay. Coming back to council. Are there any further questions for Mr. Wilkie? Okay. I guess my only comment is that this is a reporting tool and does not affect how we have traditionally done our internal bookkeeping.
Correct.
And so when you're making year-to-year comparisons within our 1,000-page system, you will still be able to make the same year-to-year comparisons.
Correct.
Yeah. Seeing no other lights lit, I would accept a motion. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. I move that the council adopt resolution number 5750, to establish a fund balance policy in accordance with Governmental Accounting Standards Board, GASB, statement number 54.
And a second, please.
Second.
And is there any other discussion on this item at this time? Seeing no lights, could we vote, please? And that passes 5-0.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and do oral communications. We are going to go back to closed session for a little bit to finish up what we didn't get finished up in our first round, but I will do closing oral communications first if there's anyone out there that would like an opportunity to speak to us on any subject. And then we will do council reports. Council members, who has a report? Councilmember Lingle.
I need to report that on, Thursday, the 24th, I was at a NCPA meeting in Lodi, and I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to get there.
Yeah. Councilmember Starbuck?
Well, just some of the highlights. It was a great honor to again attend the Vandenberg Air Force Base Awards luncheon, and I was the only council person at the Petco Pet Judging. Again, I wanted to let everybody know that you were noticeably missed. And I had a great dinner with the Shumash Foundation the other night, so thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. We had an outstanding recognition dinner with the Chumash, recognizing all of the nonprofits that they support in the county, both openly and kind of behind the scenes. And there were a lot of nonprofits there. They fund a lot of people. It's a good thing. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Marilyn. I also attended that dinner provided by the Shumash Foundation at the casino last Friday evening. Another thing I've been very involved in the community lately is the Youth Corps program. It's a program run through Community Action Commission of Santa Barbara County, which I sit on the board of. It's going to be losing its funding from the Workforce Investment Association, and so we've created a group called the Friends of the Youth Corps, and we're looking for folks who are interested in helping out with this program and helping us find some solutions to keep it going. And if you even know of the program or you've seen its positive effects in the community, testimony is appreciated as well. So I've just been very involved in having a lot of meetings trying to figure that out.
Councilmember Martner.
I'm sorry to have missed the Petco contest. It was really, actually, last year it was really fantastic, and I'm sorry I missed it.
Well, I didn't even get invited, so I feel completely left out. Councilmember Starbuck, yes, it's all going to the dogs.
You know, one event that happened last week, and I feel like I'm very compelled to talk about this, was the Lompocalypse Zombie Walk. I'd like to apologize to the pink zombie girl at the Shamrock who I took your pizza. But it was a pretty good event. I got to say that if you didn't go out and at least look, it was pretty well attended.
Okay, we have our reports. We will be adjourning to closed session. If you want to hang out, we'll have recessing to closed session. If you want to hang out, we'll be coming back to say something.